All right, I want you to picture this for a second. You're literally plummeting through a pitch-black sky over the Mediterranean Sea. It's the night of July 9th, 1943. You're strapped inside this incredibly fragile, totally unpowered glider made of just canvas and thin wood, and it is just getting violently battered by a relentless howling storm. The air is freezing cold, the noise is absolutely deafening, and below you, well, there's nothing but churning, violent ocean. Welcome to the terrifying opening hours of Operation Husky.
So, this launch? Yeah, it was absolutely not some pristine, perfectly executed tactical maneuver. Honestly, it was a catastrophic failure right out of the gate. The extreme tension from the storm caused the tow ropes connecting the gliders to their tug planes to literally snap like thread. I mean, just imagine that. Hundreds of fully geared airborne troops were abruptly cast adrift in the total dark, plunging helplessly toward those unforgiving Mediterranean waters.
Now, you might be wondering, what actually caused all this chaos? Well, it was the wind. We're talking 45-mile-per-hour winds slamming right into this armada of unpowered gliders and transport planes. To put that into perspective, they were flying headfirst into a near hurricane. The environment wasn't just hostile, it was totally blinding. Rain was just lashing at the windshields, and that extreme weather essentially stripped away any real control these pilots had over their aircraft.
And when you look at the data, the human cost of all this weather is it's staggering. 69 of these gliders crashed straight into the sea. Another 63 were scattered completely wildly off course all across the Sicilian countryside. Out of 144, just 12 actually hit their target. It's no wonder these fragile little machines quickly earned this grim, haunting nickname among the troops, flying coffins. Nearly 600 men died that night, and tragically, a vast majority of them drowned in the dark waters, completely trapped inside their sinking gliders.
Okay, let's take a step back and dive into how we even got here. How did the Allies end up in this deadly midnight storm? Well, the path to disaster actually started months earlier, in the very safe, very sterile planning rooms of the Casablanca Conference in January 1943. The Allies needed a stepping stone into Europe, right? So by spring, they pulled off Operation Mincemeat, which was this absolutely brilliant deception that convinced the Axis powers the attack would happen anywhere but Sicily. By July 9th, the launch was officially a go. But man, the contrast between those confident, comfy meetings in North Africa and the messy, brutal reality of the actual launch is just totally jarring.
At the heart of all this planning was a really bold and entirely untested strategy called vertical envelopment. The big idea here was to basically bypass all the heavy coastal defenses by dropping paratroopers and gliders directly behind enemy lines under the cover of darkness. Their job, secure the bridges, seize critical roads, and basically stop any Axis reinforcements from pushing the Allied amphibious forces back into the sea. I mean, on paper, it looked like pure strategic brilliance, but as we've already seen, the reality up in the air was total chaos.
You know, Winston Churchill actually famously lobbied for this entire invasion by calling Italy the soft underbelly of Europe. The expectation was this swift, surgical, and decisive strike that would topple a weak Italian defense and, hey, maybe even knock Italy out of the war immediately. But the reality the Allies crashed into painted a very, very different picture. They certainly didn't find a soft underbelly. What they found was a complete logistical nightmare, all wrapped up in a violent Mediterranean storm.
And just to make matters infinitely worse, get this, only 1 in 4 planes towing these gliders actually had a navigator on board. Just let that sink in for a second. You have hundreds of aircraft flying through a blinding 45-mile-per-hour storm in the absolute dead of night, and 75% of them are essentially flying blind. It basically forced this massive armada into a deadly desperate game of follow the leader. Because if the plane in front of you got lost, well, you got lost too. But honestly, the real fatal flaw of the entire operation lay right there in the cockpits. The American pilots flying the tug planes, they had zero experience in nighttime glider operations. None. And the British pilots manning the gliders, most of them had barely 4 hours of total flight time in those specific American-made machines and absolutely zero night experience. Command's decision to launch a complex, large-scale nighttime airborne op with completely inexperienced crews was, tragically, a literal recipe for the disaster that unfolded.
So because of the massive storm, the lack of navigators, and all that inexperience, Allied paratroopers were ultimately scattered across a 1,000-square-mile void in the darkness. Tiny, small pockets of men landed completely isolated from their units. Colonel James Gavin, who was a legendary commander of the 82nd Airborne, landed so incredibly far off target from his intended drop zone that for a brief moment he genuinely believed his unit had accidentally invaded mainland Italy. But here
Here is where the story takes this completely wild, paradoxical twist. What was, by all logical accounts, a massive operational failure, the scattered drops, the lost gliders, the broken communications, it inadvertently became the exact thing that saved the invasion.
This massive mismatch between what everyone expected and what actually happened is exactly how disaster turned into a huge advantage. See, the Axis expected concentrated surgical strikes on key targets. Instead, what they got were thousands of scattered, totally isolated Allied squads just roaming around in the dark. So instead of mounting a coordinated defense, the Axis forces became completely terrified. I mean, they were getting reports of paratroopers landing literally everywhere across the island. The Allies couldn't block reinforcements in the traditional way, so these lost squads just started causing random, unpredictable havoc, cutting telephone wires, ambushing isolated batteries, intercepting couriers. They accidentally created the illusion of an omnipresent, massive, island-wide attack that just completely paralyzed the Axis command.
And this scattered chaos directly changed the tide of the invasion. Take the Ponte Grande Bridge, for example. It was a vital, highly strategic choke point. But it wasn't taken by some massive, perfectly coordinated battalion. No, it was captured by a ragged, totally exhausted group of just 50 lost British paratroopers. After scrounging whatever little gear they had left, they basically fired a few half-hearted volleys at the entrenched Italian coastal defenders. And to their absolute shock, the defenders just surrendered or fled into the night.
Colonel James Gavin actually observed this broken morale firsthand. He noted that, literally, a machine gun would open up and then, almost instantly, the white flags would appear. You see, after losing North Africa, dealing with poor equipment, and having deep friction with their German allies, the Italian coastal defenders just had very little incentive to stand their ground. So, the white flags came out fast. But, we have to note, this early ease would stand in incredibly stark contrast to the fierce, hardened German resistance that was waiting for the Allies up in the mountainous north of the island.
Now, before they could even fully engage those German forces, the Allies suffered another really profound self-inflicted wound. On the night of July 11th, a massive reinforcement drop of paratroopers was scheduled to come in, but the Allied naval and army gunners on the ground and on the ships were deeply jittery. They'd been dealing with repeated relentless attacks from German bombers all day, so when they suddenly spotted the silhouettes of their own friendly C-47 transport planes overhead, they opened fire. It was a staggering tragedy. 23 Allied transport planes were shot straight out of the sky by their own forces, resulting in hundreds of completely unnecessary casualties. Because of the mounting resistance, it ultimately took 38 agonizing days of intense, absolute grinding combat through the harsh, rocky terrain and mountain passes of the Etna Line to finally secure Sicily. The German forces conducted this brilliant, punishing rearguard withdrawal that basically made the Allies bleed for every single mile. So Churchill's grand vision of a soft underbelly? Yeah, that was proven entirely false. It was in reality a brutal, arduous slog that tested the absolute limits of the Allied armies.
But look, these tragedies, as awful as they weren't in vain. They really built the foundation for the rest of the war. General WWII Eisenhower didn't just shrug and move on from Husky. He studied its failures obsessively. The blood-soaked lessons of Sicily directly ensured the success of the Normandy invasion 11 months later. Just look at the steps they took for D-Day. Step 1. Never ever ignore the meteorologists. You have to wait for clear weather. Step 2. You cannot fly blind. They started using dedicated Pathfinder units, jumping ahead to light up and guide the drops. And Step 3. To prevent another horrific friendly fire massacre, they painted massive, unmissable black and white invasion stripes on every single Allied aircraft. So when we look back, Operation Husky truly was the storm before the dawn. The sheer tragedy of the flying coffins, the chaos of the scattered paratroopers, the heartbreak of the friendly fire. It was a brutal, incredibly steep learning curve. But it was the exact education the Allied forces required. Honestly, without the painful, chaotic mess of the Sicilian night drop, the meticulously planned airborne drops over Normandy might have ended in total catastrophe.
Which brings us to the big takeaway of this entire explainer. When you really dig into Operation Husky, you kind of have to ask yourself, does military victory truly come from flawless, pristine planning in some quiet map room? Or is it actually born from the sheer, gritty human ability of soldiers on the ground to adapt, improvise, and fight through catastrophic failure? It is definitely something to think about the next time you hear someone talking about a perfect battle plan. Thanks so much for exploring this with me.